President Trump announcing a 90-day pause on some tariffs, excluding China. Joining us now with more, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett, who all along, I think, we divided people up into the negotiators. That was Bessent, and you're going to probably won't like this. So that was Bessent and Elon, and I would say you. And then we had the stand firm, no negotiators, and that was maybe the Commerce Secretary and maybe Peter Navarro. It looks like something that you said earlier in the week, Kevin, that sort of got, I don't know, circulated as fact instead of fiction. That was like a market check. Yesterday it happened, and indeed, 3,000 points.
Well, first of all, I don't really like the characterization that we're divided amongst teams. In fact, I would say that the person who, right at the final minute, was with the president when the president decided to do the pause that we had been talking about all along was Secretary Lutnick. Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Bessent were in the room for the final call with the president. And I think that's a nice clarification of how we're not on different teams, warring teams. We're all on the same team.
I know boys will be boys, according to Carolyn Levitt, but are you not on X? You didn't. I still don't get anything except talk about that whatever you want to call it, that food fight between Elon Musk and Ron Varro, Peter Navarro.
Well, as you know, that I practice a martial art called Aikido, where basically what you try to do is redirect negative energy so that it works against the guy and doesn't turn it into an all-out scuffle. And I think verbal Aikido is a better choice. It's a better choice.
So, Kevin,
it's a better choice for people.
I characterize it as the art of the deal on one side and hitting your head against the wall until, because it feels so good when you stop, and that the actual what happened yesterday was somewhere in the middle. I guess you'd say it was all art of the deal. This was the plan all along to goad China into being isolated.
Well, I think that what's been going on all along is the president recognizes that in order to get the big change that we need for America's workers, like these are really fundamental changes that we're talking about, that we need to create enough pressure on our trading partners that things that American presidents have been asking for the last decades are actually offered at the table. I can say that I was on a call with the Swiss president yesterday with President Trump. We've got a whole system set up through Susie Wiles and the cabinet secretaries that we're starting to have a meeting today after lunch, where we prioritize our allies and other countries and decide who or what is going to visit and when. But I can tell you that the amount of stuff that's coming to the table came up really a lot, long before the market movements this week. And so it was looking like that there had been enough action to get us to the point where we should really genuinely start negotiating. And if you go back and look, you can see the negotiation signals were out there already, even on that Monday where somebody made a fake tweet that suddenly said that I was saying something that ended up being kind of mostly true on Wednesday. And so anyway, I think that everything was moving forward in an orderly fashion, and there's no doubt that the Treasury market yesterday made it so that the decision that it's about time to move was made, I think, with perhaps a little more urgency, but it was going to happen at any moment anyway.
You expect real negotiations over the next 90 days. Right. People say it's happy talk, and it's and in fact, all these trading partners are going to be emboldened now to not do anything because they know that the president's not serious or he's going to blink. So they can just wait out, and they got 90 days now, and they don't have to do anything.
I talked with Jamison Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, yesterday, just to get an update on the number of countries. And of course, saying you've got a lot of countries calling, that's one thing, right? But, they could be calling to say, how's the weather out there? But then having people really begin negotiations to make offers, that's a different number. That number is like closing in on 20. There's a little bit of discussion about exactly, well, did they really make an offer? But for sure, there's a bunch of offers that are really sensible offers, and they're coming from our top trading partners. And it's some of the most progress in trade negotiation that I think probably the most progress that we've ever seen. And so I think that this system that the president set up to say, hey, we're serious about negotiation, we're serious about reciprocity. If you guys come down, we'll come down. To do that, we've got to have some negotiations. The fact that people started to send stuff. We had 2 deals almost closed as of last week, almost closed. Getting them closed requires the lawyers to work forever and so on. And so getting them closed by yesterday was not quite going to happen. But yes, there's a big inventory of deals that are right close to the finish line.
All right, that's interesting.
Kevin, how much of the decision was led by, in terms of to pause yesterday, was led by the bond market and what you were seeing there and anxiety on that front?
My view, and you know, I've been on the show for 20 years, right, is always to just shoot straight. My view is that they were very, very close. It could well be that the announcement that came out yesterday was going to happen anyway because there were so many deals teed up. There was a discussion about whether a general pause or a few deals that are just about finalized are the way to move to the next step and to make it clear to markets that we're serious about the strategy that we're following. And I think in the end, everybody decided as a team, you know, all the way from you know, Peter Navarro to whoever else you think is on the other side, agreed to do it this way. And I think, you know, the fact that the bond market was telling us, hey, it's probably time to move, certainly would have contributed at least a little bit to that thinking. But it wasn't the bond market that made a panic move because there was a very systematic, well-planned move that was just about to happen. It just turned out to be at the same time.
Right. Now, the reason I ask about the bond market, Kevin, is as this plays out over the next 90 days, and we all watch the bond market as well, and I imagine you folks will too, if we see a spike in the bond market in a similar way to what we saw, you know, in the last 48 hours prior to the pause, how you think that changes the negotiations, or if it does at all, and also how our allies or folks who may not be our allies or negotiating against us on tariffs are going to be thinking about that bond market.
Well, I think that you can think about there being two phases. Phase one is going to be where we demonstrate the truth that with the guidance of Susie Wiles, the Chief of Staff's office, that we've set up a process so that these negotiations can proceed in a very orderly, well thought out fashion with timelines and so on and priorities. And again, there's a big meeting about that with senior cabinet officials today here in the White House. And then once we show you, well, here's how we're doing it, then I think that'll be very reassuring for markets because I understand not only are they serious, but we can even see the schedule and we can see the priorities. So the priorities make sense. And then I think that the second phase will be when you start to see the actual deals and see the characteristic of them and they say, oh, not only are they talking about it, but they're delivering. And oh my, that thing they delivered is really great for American workers. That second phase is going to be much faster than you might think because basically we've got a few deals that we've been working on ahead of this that are really, really well advanced.
Kevin, I think that's a big part of the question, what those deals look like. I mean, there had been questions asked because even renegotiating NAFTA took 2 years to do. Are these just kind of straight across the board, bring tariffs down here, cut these non-tariff barriers? Is it a formula that's kind of working, or is every country different?
Well, in the end, the asks are going to be put forward by the president, guided by the same trade team that got us to this point. And I think that the asks will be sometimes extremely clear to the public, and sometimes they'll be quiet things that involve things that people don't even talk very much about, involving military matters or so on. And so it's an all of the above approach to make the relationships between our countries much stronger than they've ever been before. And I'm really highly excited about it. It's going to be a heck of a time. And when you talk about timing, when I talked about, well, 60 days, 90 days, the book Around the World in 80 Days kind of ran into my mind. And I'm thinking, well, if we say 90 days, then let's shoot for 80 days. And I think that when I look at the schedules that we're getting ready to debate and talk about, I think it's very doable, very doable.
Hey, Kevin, when we were still in negotiation mode, we were hearing that we could go to 0-0 with a lot of these countries, but that doesn't cut it. There's so many other things in terms of currency manipulations and, you know, VATs and all these other protectionist things that went into that crazy measurement that the administration used to try to summarize all of them using, you know, trade deficits. That seems like no way you could get some of those deals done in 90 days. Are we going to accept much less than what we were promised in terms of getting rid of all the impediments to trade?
I don't think there's any chance that if Secretary Bessent or Secretary Lutnick, the two of the main negotiators for this, are going to go out and come up with a deal and then they show it to the president, that if the president doesn't think that it satisfies his objectives for the American people, then those negotiators on our team are going to hear from it. And boy, I can tell you, I've seen what happens in the past in the previous administration when deals are negotiated that the president doesn't like. He sends them back to the drawing board until he's ready to strike a deal that he thinks is right for the American people.
What are we doing with China? Was that was that, are we isolating China to finally decouple, which is something that's a, something that's been talked about, but I don't know in practice whether it's really possible, or do you expect them to come to the negotiating table? Because most pundits say that, that Xi is backed into a corner and there's no way he's going to come around at this point.
President Trump has a strong relationship with President Xi. They've had conversations in the past that have been very productive. Those conversations haven't begun yet. When they begin, I think, is a decision that President Trump will decide. And I don't have any clarity on whether that's going to be soon or later. But I know that the president has had a lot of progress, made a lot of progress in the past by speaking directly with President Xi. And I'd be shocked if at some point that doesn't happen.
We had Professor Jeremy Siegel on earlier this morning, and he brought up a few questions about this. He said, look, first of all, it takes the markets time to recover from the psychological damage that they've experienced the last 8 days. And he also said he did not think that the United States holds as many cards as we think we do when it comes to negotiating with China. What would you respond to that?
I think that given the massive trade deficit that we have, that there are really quite a few cards that are held that are very difficult for China to adjust to. So think about it right now that there are whole container ships filled with stuff that might be sitting in port in China right now wondering what they're supposed to do. And then the factories that reload the incoming container ships wondering whether they should shut down for a while because they don't know where they're going to be shipping the stuff. It's an absolute extreme disruption for the Chinese economy right now that's come because of repeated terrible behavior on their part, including aiding and abetting the fentanyl trade. And so I think China's going to have to figure something out, and my guess is it's going to involve reaching out to us and setting up talks. But their economy is certainly right now going through the kind of shock that they probably never expected.
Hey, Kevin, how does this whole pause change the timeline to the extent it does around the budget talks, around taxes? That's something that, House Speaker Mike Johnson has talked about. He thought completing in the month of May, given that I imagine these talks are now going to play out in a longer way in terms of the tariff piece and potentially the revenue that could come with that. And I know that was something that was important to the administration in terms of thinking about how to therefore construct the budget. I imagine we're now talking about sometime in the summer. Does this get pushed to the fall? Where are we?
I don't think the very ambitious timeline that the White House has signaled has been changed at all. If anything, things can even go faster. What's happening is that the Big Six group, which includes Scott Bessent and me, and then the leadership of the House and the Senate, we've been meeting every week and negotiating the tough negotiating things so that both the House and the Senate, when they move forward, that they're moving forward in a kind of ratcheted way so that they don't slip back. And I think that we're going to hopefully see that this week when the House passes the Senate budget instructions. And then from there, all of a sudden, the committees are going to start writing the stuff. And a lot of that stuff the committee's been working on since last summer. And so I think that absolutely the big, beautiful tax bill is right on schedule. And then it is a technical matter that I know that market participants like to think about is that now that we've got, say, $2 billion a day in tariff revenue coming in, that's a lot of revenue that can help reduce budget deficits, should be good for bond markets. How does that influence the package? And the bottom line is that what will happen will be that the CBO, when it sees the revenue, will start to adjust the baseline for revenue to include the tariff revenue that comes in. And that will reduce the deficit.
Right,
it'd be good for bond markets, but it won't affect the overall numbers that they agreed to. It won't count as a tax increase, right? It's just like a baseline adjustment.
Kevin, I appreciate the perspective that it won't be part of the full CBO and scoring. That's something that we've talked to Secretary Bessent about. But I always thought that the administration, and at least some Republicans, were thinking of trying to include some of those numbers, at least in terms of how they were going to sell the plan to the public and to others. When if we're talking about taking down taxes on tips and things like that, and part of it was creating some kind of permanence around those tariffs, so that you knew that revenue was also permanent. If that revenue is not permanent, because there's still talks going on, that will therefore change the dynamic with which you would negotiate around the budget. No.
Well, what I'm meaning to say, Aaron, is that the tariff revenue, if Congress decides to write into law the president's objectives, then we would, of course, celebrate that. But there's a plan right now that gets this tax bill done, before we all go home for vacation in August, and well before then, and that it doesn't require any tricky maneuvers with the tariffs. The tee, right? Like the ball is on the tee, and they can hit it. And the tariffs are going to be something that should make the budget hawks really happy, because the deficit will be lower than they ever dreamed possible, but it won't affect the reconciliation process.
So, Kevin, the 10%, you add the 10%, the tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and you add in China, and these are still the highest tariff rates I think we've had people say since Smoot-Hawley. So is that permanent? Is this now? We heard the other things are going to be permanent. It's hard to really gauge what's real and what is sort of more posturing. But do you expect this to be a permanent situation, or this is fluid as well?
No, I think everybody expects the 10% baseline tariff is going to be the baseline, and that it's going to take some kind of extraordinary deal for the president to go below there.
In the way that I don't know if history is ever going to really come down with sort of the administration's spin on how it all happened. You've seen some of the articles that that the president was watching some TV yesterday, and saw different things happening that finally forced his hand, and that some of his closest advisors didn't find out exactly what was happening. It just seems like a lot of this, if you're going to call it the art of the deal, should we just assume that it is an art, it's not a science, and you can get to this point and it was all deliberate when it's all said and done, or are you just sort of being buffeted by circumstance and finally arriving at a policy that affects the entire globe, frankly?
No, this policy was discussed at length with a whole bunch of trade advisors over many, many weeks. In the end, the president had multiple options to decide between, and he knew that he had to create leverage to get people to the table to begin negotiations. He did that before the final decision, and the negotiations lifted off like really crazy, right? A couple days before markets started gyrating. And so then the question is, how do we start to show that we're genuinely going to have these negotiations? And we had a couple of deals that are close to finished, and we also had the idea that we could have a pause. And the president decided to pick the latter approach, which was something that had been studied all along, all the way to the beginning, about like how do we go from first let them know we're serious to second getting negotiations that actually deliver for the American people.
Right.
And the president chose this path, and it was not something that he thought up the last minute.
Right, but was it deliberate overkill on the calculation used for those very high tariffs that allowed the United States, to cut it in half and have very high tariffs? Was that all part of the plan?
The original IEEPA was meant to address the trade deficit, which is viewed as a national emergency, and having the tariffs be a function of the trade deficit seemed like the logical thing to do for the lawyers at the USTR. And those numbers ended up being pretty high. And I think, did the higher numbers help get people to the table, help people understand the urgency of what we're trying to accomplish? I'm sure they did.
Okay, good. Kevin, thank you. Kevin Hassett.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Hope to see you again soon. Thanks.